Okay, so starting off with Tyrannosaurus Rex, we'll get this out of the way. We're going to open up the cockpit to reveal the Red Ranger in there, and you can see it's fairly close to the same size as this little miniature, maybe a little bit smaller, but he's in there. It's a nice touch. I don't know that it was really necessary, but, you know, nice touch nonetheless. There are no stickers on this guy, so everything is painted yellow, red, a little bit of green there, the blue for the eyes, the silver, all of that's painted. I don't really see any kind of paint sloppiness on mine. There on the sides, along the tail, even a little bit on the back. Yeah, I don't really have any, you know, paint imperfections or anything like that on mine. So no worries there. And then here, looking at the Tyrannosaurus, there's a lot more like molded detail throughout to make it definitely look a lot more robotic. Something that the SOC version, or probably any other version, never really did. I mean, you do have some panel lining or whatever, but this one definitely looks more mechanized, if that makes sense. And then here are the two side by side, and the SOC is definitely shorter than the Hasbro version, but we'll zoom out to take a better look. Okay, it's tricky because the tails are so long that they're hitting my backdrop here, so I have to kind of place them in a certain position. But if we want to look at the two Tyrannosaurus Rex Zords side by side, you could see the tricky thing is because they're the same design, so we're not really going to see any kind of major differences. The differences are going to be kind of in the scale of things, and then of course, you know, there's die-cast parts on this guy versus non-die-cast parts on the Hasbro, which it's all plastic, which has its benefits and it has its negatives. I mean, the SOC has got a lot of weight to it, but because of the weight and when the Megazord's together, it's very flimsy. And I'm hoping that, you know, with the all-plastic Hasbro version, that the weight doesn't create that issue. But, you know, there's just kind of some different things, right? With the metal, the die-cast, things look a lot cleaner in terms of, like, the silver and stuff. But, you know, it's not, like, everything. It's great, sure, but, you know, when we look at cost, you know, it's quite a bit more. And, again, the Hasbro version is a lot more detailed, or a lot more added detail in terms of, like, you know, showing that it's a, you know, it's a large mech, that it's robotic, right? So you get all these like sculpted lines in here where we really don't have all that much on the Tyrannosaurus Rex. There are some differences in the articulation and things. So like here on the SOC, we actually got articulated hands where the fingers open up. We do not get that at all on the Hasbro version. But articulation is going to be similar, but what Hasbro did is they added this ab rocker, or this ab crunch there, so you can actually get a little bit of movement there. The SOC does not have that at all. There's a swivel though, and then we also have a swivel on the Hasbro, but it's not really ratcheting, as you don't hear it when it turns there. The SOC, I thought the mouth opened up. Maybe there it goes. So you can open up the mouth on the SOC. Hasbro, yes, you can, but one thing that's very ugly on the Hasbro, that yes, they kind of put the cannons in there. They're kind of in a funky spot. You really see the Megazord head in there, whereas you don't really see it on the SOC version. So there, you know, there's a little bit of a design difference there as well. But yeah, like one's, you know, it's crazy actually having them side by side, because we do get some die-cast. There's not a huge amount on the T-Rex, but they're actually pretty similar in size. But again, this one's taller, so that does kind of play a factor there. Looking at the tail, their tails are about the same, but again, the details in the differences are in the detail. So like the line work there on the Hasbro version, whereas we don't get any lines on the SOC version. So it's just kind of those differences. We got articulated elbow on the SOC. We did not get an articulated elbow on the Hasbro. We just get it at the shoulder, so it just rotates, and then it kind of comes out a little bit like a butterfly, but not a whole lot. But we did get that on the SOC version as well. In terms of like the legs, it's kind of an ugly knee joint, but it's going to be necessary when we piece it together, I'm sure, and combine it. Like we get some covers for those pegs for the legs, things like that. They don't really snap in, and they can kind of move easily, so you just kind of want to be aware of that. There is some ankle pivot, as you could see there on the Hasbro version. SOC had a little bit of that as well. So again, it's just the largest difference is going to be kind of in the design, whereas Hasbro took a more artistic design, I guess, whereas the SOC just kind of went straight for what the toy recreations would have looked like. But on to the next one. Okay, so I opened the cockpit ahead of time because this one was a pain in the ass, but you could see the little Black Ranger inside of there. But this one was really tricky. Like, I had to kind of pull it back from the top and then get my finger underneath to open that cockpit so you could see him in there. But here we have the SOC and the Hasbro version. And again, some major changes in the details. There's a lot more sculpt work that went into the Hasbro version. As you could see, all these sculpted details that are now in it, where everything was smooth lines and everything for the Mastodon. If you look at size, there is not a huge size difference between the two, but it is pretty noticeable. And again, like, the Mastodon's got some weight to it because this one has kind of a lot of die-cast parts, like here on the shoulders and everything. We get some changes. So you have like an articulated trunk. Hasbro did not give us an articulated trunk. We got the chromed out tusks. Hasbro did not give us chromed out tusks. But there's a little wiggle room in there, actually. That's kind of surprising. But looking at it, not a whole lot of difference. We got a dark gray on the head of the SOC version for some reason. Hasbro, it is black, but again, the shape of it is a little bit different, as you could see kind of how rounded it is up at the top. We get a lot of paint details on the Hasbro one. And again, no real sloppiness on mine, so I really don't have any issues. But again, it's just some of the design choice is just so much different looking at kind of all the mechanized look to it versus like the SOC. So that's kind of a big difference. But the Mastodon looks really good. I have no complaints. In terms of articulation, there is a little bit of back leg articulation. That's probably because, right, that's got to flip around into the hand. So no real articulation, like the head's not going to move or anything like that. So he's just kind of stationary. Whereas the SOC didn't really, I mean, you had that, but that's more of the transforming piece. So not a whole lot to the Mastodon. Next. Okay, so here we have the Triceratops, the Blue Ranger's Megazord, or Zord, excuse me. The horn here is actually where it lifts up for the cockpit to reveal our mini Blue Ranger. And we have, again, here, that one next to his Zord. You can see the size difference. But looking at the two, the SOC Soul of Chogokin and the Hasbro Zap Zord Ascension project, some differences. Well, this one, the SOC, right, the horns came out to reveal some real metal chains in there. And then you got to put these horns back. The Hasbro one is not going to do that. I never thought that was a real necessary function of the SOC, but it's definitely a cool feature, even if, you know, its practical use isn't really going to make sense. But some of the difference here is going to be size. There is a huge size difference between these two Zords. If you can see, like, the lengthwise, it's very, very noticeable. Width may actually almost be about the same because they both have a feature where, you know, you would push them in and you would kind of widen them out when they're in regular Zord mode, but those would kind of push in when it comes to combining into the Megazord. So the Hasbro one does that as well. As we saw earlier, you could just push them in and pull them back out, but you want to be careful and evenly kind of throughout pull them out. They both have the articulated tail where you can get the cannons and move that around. One big difference that the Hasbro version has, the Triceratops here, the head was almost like on a ball joint, so you can move it, you can swivel it a little bit. Hasbro's, you have that same thing, but look right there inside, you actually get that articulated neck, so you can move it more side by side a little bit and gives you more room. Now, up and down, of course, was always going to happen because as this turns into the leg, the foot, you always had that, but there's that back and forth, side to side motion that we didn't really have before. Now, paint apps, not too sloppy, but I had some scuff marks right here in the white. It just looks kind of funky. So that's kind of a bummer. There's a lot of sculpted detail in the stuff for the Triceratops. So looking at it closer, just look at all the sculpted detail all on the sides and everything versus the SOC where it's just all like smooth everything. You get some lines, panels, and whatnot, but we get a whole lot of it on the Hasbro version, so it just adds a little bit more of an aesthetic look to it that, you know, I don't really mind, but it's just kind of weird seeing the two together. But if you just have the Hasbro one, I think that's going to work, and you really won't have anything to complain about there. It's just, you know, a design choice. Used to seeing smooth, but it's not bad, but, you know, if it wasn't there, I wouldn't mind it. But let's see the saber-tooth tiger now. Okay, so here we have the saber-tooth tiger, significantly larger than the SOC, as you can see side by side. But yeah, it's a huge size difference, as you can see, between the two. Height a little bit, but definitely in the length. It's not as well, I guess, you know, depending on how you get these feet, you know, again, it is, you know, a fairly significant size difference. But the Hasbro one, you know, it being all plastic, there's a lot of die cast on this saber-tooth tiger, so there's a huge difference in terms of weight. But that's, for the most part, that's it. But there's a couple of things that are kind of frustrating with this one. Like on the SOC, we got articulated feet on the back hind legs. We got the knee. And then at the foot as well. But the Hasbro one is, we didn't get articulated feet on this one. So you really have to position those legs to where those feet are going to be flat. You can't really get it any other way in between. Now, you could adjust this depending on how you bend that knee. But again, it makes it a little bit more difficult. So in terms of like a running stance, you know, it's a little bit harder to do. You can do some things, but these back legs, there's definitely a lot less that you could do. But you know what? There is a knee where I didn't realize there was a knee bend in there before. But again, still, there's none at the ankle, so you still have to position that where the feet are going to be flat. And that just limits the poses that you're going to do for the saber-tooth tiger. The SOC, you know, you had articulated head there, and then the body had a little bit of a side-to-side motion there. We get, I feel, a lot more that's definitely easier to do on this one, because it's on a ball joint, so you can actually rotate it around. The head, you can go up and down. There's not a whole lot of pivot and swivel. There's some, and then of course the neck does go up and down a little bit, but you get a lot of motion in that body there. But the legs, again, are tricky, because without the articulated ankle, it just makes it a lot more difficult to get this in the right kind of poses for the saber-tooth, to where all 4 feet are flat on the ground. Because like even right now, I'm having a heck of a hard time doing it to where it actually looks good and is not like leaning too much to one side. Both mouths do articulate as well, so you can see opens there, and then the SOC opens there. But that is the saber-tooth tiger. Much like the other Zords, again, we get a lot more panel work in the mold and the details of the Zord, whereas we did not get that on the SOC. And then one thing here is we actually have some translucent red plastic on the back of the tail right there. The SOC, it was just kind of red paint there. But I actually kind of like the translucent red look. But yeah, there's the saber-tooth tiger. Now let's see the pterodactyl. Of course, I forgot this, but here's the Yellow Ranger, and then the cockpit opens up here, and you can see the Yellow Ranger there controlling the Zord. Okay, definitely needed to be elevated for the two pterodactyls. Now, this isn't going to be the most frustrating, but at the same time, it's the smallest Zord. You know, for me, it was probably my least favorite Zord out of the bunch. But you know, so there's not necessarily a whole lot that goes to it, but the problem with the Hasbro one is going to be the neck and not getting it to stay. You could do there at that point, but nowhere in between. And even, you know, at that spot, chances are it's going to fall down on you. But if anything, you know, this is, I would say, kind of the more proper way of the pterodactyl anyway. So with its head right there, and you could still, you know, articulate it to look down and whatnot. That's really not a problem. Looking at the inside of it, not a whole lot there. But again, a lot of sculpted detail in the the mold of it, so all that line work in there, whereas the SOC, again, just real clean lines, and that's it. Huge weight difference because, you know, die cast, no die cast. One thing that is different is this portion here on the Hasbro is fully articulated. Not exactly sure why, and I'm sure that's going to come into play when you put the Megazord together, but it is just kind of weird, and it's not super floppy, but, you know, it definitely, if you just kind of hit it, it's going to knock out of the way pretty significantly. But just looking at it from this standpoint, it's not too bad. But the SOC was really nice because you could have positioned this neck anywhere you wanted to, and it was a nice tight resistance, so it wasn't going to fall down anywhere. The chrome was kind of nice, although mine looks all funky. I gotta like try to figure out how to clean that off and whatnot. Design elements are basically the same. Again, it's just a little more detailed on the Hasbro. And then for whatever reason, not just getting the full shine, we get this hexagonal pattern in there. I don't know why. There's a clear piece of plastic over that silver portion, so that hexagonal, you don't feel it. It's all smooth, so the plastic really covers it. It's just one of those design choices that I don't really agree with, but it is what it is in terms of the Pterodactyl. So just kind of how it is when it comes to the Megazord and how it's going to look on the chest. Kind of unfortunate. Looking at the cockpit, there is the Pink Ranger, and that looks great. So yeah, there is the Pterodactyl. Not a whole lot to it. It's just the wings kind of, you know, fold in easily when it's time to be the chest piece, although you actually would get the head folded in there, and it folds in there the exact same the SOC version does, as you can see that, because that was, you know, pretty accurate to the show as well. But then there is our chest piece for the Megazord, which I will put together now, and I just don't think I'm going to do it on camera because I think it's going to be a crazy amount of steps. I may, you know, do a little video here and there throwing pieces in the progress, but yeah, don't expect a full on like how to walk through of how to put it together.